All right, so for today, we have Doctors Brittany Arthur and Bathsheba Guy. They'll both be talking about using participatory methods to foster inclusion for women in engineering. Dr. Brittany Arthur currently serves as an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati in the Division of Experience-Based Learning and Career Education, where she oversees cooperative education or co-op experiences for engineering students. Dr. Arthur prides herself on being a participatory action researcher, specifically using a feminist approach to ensure the voices of the marginalized are heard. And Dr. Bathsheba Guy, also known as Shiva, is a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional, educator, participatory action researcher, and program developer. She is the current higher education consulting senior associate with Huron. Dr. Guy's professional interests revolve around utilizing participatory and community-based methods to engage and support racially and ethnically diverse groups and women in the workplace. The floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. No matter how long we've done this virtual thing, it will still always take minutes to get yourself situated. So can you see my screen? Yes, okay, perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Sheva and I are coming to you from separate locations, but in Cincinnati, Ohio. We hope it is sunny and warmer wherever you are than it is here. So, but thanks for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to sharing our experiences in using participatory research to understand the voices of women in engineering, specifically at the University of Cincinnati. We want this to be interactive and engaging, so we have a variety of touch points throughout that we want you to engage with us. But if you have questions or something doesn't make sense, please do not hesitate to stop us, to put something in the chat. We want this to be engaging. And at the end of this, we want you to feel really comfortable and confident in kind of having some insight and going, ooh, I think I want to use this. I want to do this in my space. So we want you to feel confident as we go through this. So just to give you a quick overview, we'll do an introduction of ourselves so that you understand us. We'll do an intro activity. We'll go over participatory methods. We'll do some examples. We'll do a brainstorming activity so you can leave here feeling good about potentially trying this in your space, and then we'll do a wrap-up activity. Okay, Sheva.
Thank you, Brittany. So yes, I am Sheva Guy. I am a current senior associate at Huron doing higher education consulting. So I transitioned from doing diversity and inclusion work in engineering to consulting work. But the common thread throughout that is consistently using participatory methods to promote equity and inclusion in those spaces. All my pronouns are she, hers. And I'll toss it to you, Brittany.
Awesome. I hope you cannot hear my very angry child upstairs. Investing in good AirPods is important. So I'm Dr. Brittany Arthur. I'm an associate professor at the University of Cincinnati. As mentioned before, I oversee cooperative education experiences for mechanical engineering students. So at the University of Cincinnati, students participate in 5 semesters of co-op. So I get the pleasure of getting to work with students from freshman year until after they graduate, which is a really awesome experience. Sheva and I always joke, we met by chance doing this research. So someone introduced us when I was doing my dissertation research. And I also joke that women in engineering was not what I started a doctoral program choosing to study. This research, I believe, chose me. I met with one of my female students after her first co-op rotation and thought, wow, it is, I guess at the time, like 2017. This is crazy. And if students treat my female students like this, when people are around, how do they treat them when no one is looking? So really started diving into this and wanting to understand women at the university's experiences, on our campus, but also more specifically while on co-op, and we'll dive deeper into that. So as mentioned, I'm a participatory researcher, thoroughly believing that a more feminist approach is what we need, and it's not used widely in the engineering space. And I believe it's one of the reasons that we haven't seen a lot of progress over the past many decades when it comes to recruitment and retention of women in this space. So, all right, so we want you to take a moment to introduce yourself. So we're going to use the chat feature just to get a pulse check of who's in the room with us today. So if you'll take a second in the chat, we want to know, your name, who are you representing, right? Is it a city? Is it an institution? Is it an organization? We want to know, and then more importantly, we want to know what brings you to this space today. As participatory researchers, Sheva and I believe in honoring the human that comes to this space, right? Not the professional or the colleague, but who are you as a human? So what brings you to this space? If you're not comfortable at answering that question, I can reframe it as, what are you hoping to get out of this? Why did you sign up for this session? What are you hoping to leave with? What can Sheva and I provide clarity on? So just wanting to hear from you so that we can tailor how we do this song and dance to meet the needs. We should have had music ready to go, Sheva.
I was literally just thinking that. Do you want me to sing? Just kidding. That's not happening.
Where's your happy day playlist that we would play at all of our GLA?
Oh yeah, yes, that was a good one. It's like the songs to sing in the shower playlist, wasn't it? Or the happy something. Those are good.
On Spotify.
Yep, love it. Well, I'm seeing a lot of folks saying that looking for like applications, looking for tangible techniques, inclusive techniques, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about. So perfect. Hopefully you should walk away, given our activity, with a tangible way to implement what we're sharing with you at where you are in your spaces. Perfect. I see K through 12 outreach. I love that. I think even though we're specifically going to give an example of how we use this with undergraduate students, these techniques can certainly be used with other populations as well, of course.
Solar, I love this title, Chief Belonging, Inclusion, and Diversity Officer. Okay, is that everybody?
We've got a few more coming in, I think. Strategies for inclusive learning can certainly be used in the classroom.
I like Christina's here as a Black feminist. We call my daughter Belle after Bell Hooks. So.
Yeah, everyone submit a proposal after this. Love it. Got to plug it. I love it. Awesome.
Share your genius with the world.
Yes. Okay, so I think that that's pretty much everybody. I think we can go on to the next. All right. Thank you, Brittany. So I'm going to chat with y'all, as Brittany mentioned in our agenda, about different types of what are participatory methods, different types of participatory methods. And eventually that participatory methods tongue twister will come out flawlessly out of my mouth. But until then, we'll bear with it. And then Brittany's going to give a tangible example of a time that we have used participatory methods and what came out of it. So when we are talking about participatory methods, we want to actively involve the public. So we are actively involving the community or the participants that are engaging in whatever method we're using are a thread throughout. So nothing happens without that without that input from the community and that engagement from the community. So it's stakeholder driven. So if I'm wanting to know about a stakeholder group or make things better, make things more inclusive, we're including them, of course, in the process throughout. And that's what makes participatory methods unique outside of traditional research methods, right? So we're not seeing folks as participants, but really as co-researchers with us. And as such, it's a very social justice oriented methodology as well as action centered. So we're not just learning about how to make things more inclusive, but we're creating action at the end with our stakeholders. And of course, we'll give those tangible examples of how we did it. All right. Oh, perfect. Yes. So one sometimes overlooked, but very, very key aspect of using participatory methods is to acknowledge one's own positionality and to not only create a positionality statement, but reflect throughout utilizing the method and throughout a project or a program, acknowledging who you are in the space that you're working in. So I have this CAN definition, which is the stance of the researcher in relation to the social and political context of the study, the community, the organization, or the participant group. So for example, in terms of when I was writing my dissertation on women in STEM, I was a woman in STEM as well, and was acknowledging that I was fully had to kind of try not separate myself, but understand and reflect on that, and reflect on my own bias and viewpoints, because despite what traditional positivistic research tells us, we all have biases, and we do bring biases into the research space, and we do care deeply about the things we research, right? So we do have those, we do bring our full selves into that space. We need to acknowledge that. So we know that the position that's adopted by us as the researcher affects every phase of the research process. So that it's very iterative in terms of the reflection and acknowledging who you are in relation to the project and the people. All right. So Brittany and I, we always say that participatory methods are beautiful, and they really are. The beauty of participatory methods is they're adaptable and they're versatile. So there are a variety of different ways you can utilize participatory methods with a variety of different stakeholders. So we're specifically going to talk about undergraduate women in engineering, but I saw K through 12 there. You can do this with I've done participatory methods with faculty, staff, younger children, all of that. So there's multiple different populations that this will work with, and it can do a variety of things. So of course, the root of it is answering a research question, but that's not the only thing we can do with participatory methods. So we want to address problems and help create solutions for those problems. Creating a new program or course. I saw some folks saying like things about inclusive learning, making sure my students feel included. I've seen participatory methods being used to create an inclusive syllabus with students. So certainly multiple different ways we can use them, and assessing current programs to make them better, among others. So there's tons of different participatory methods. We're going to focus on 3. I will share a little bit about each of these. Group level assessment is by far our favorite. We've used it in person. We've used it virtually. We've written about what it's like for stakeholders to participate in group level assessment. So even just within one method, there's multiple variations. But these are 3 traditional participatory methods that can be used, and they can be modified. All right. So future creating workshops. So this is a multi-day participatory method. So you will find that within participatory methods, they can be bounded within the space of a couple hours, like we've done with some of our GLAs, or they can be extended. A future creating workshop is a multi-day participatory method. So it requires a little bit more investment and forethought because of simply the time. So basically what a future creating workshop does, and this picture is actually from like 2016, when I was working on my dissertation with women undergraduates in STEM, and we were exploring the research question, how can we better support women in STEM that are doing research at the undergraduate level? And the crux of Future Creating Workshop is envisioning a utopian future to instigate social change. So we have our vision of what a utopian future looks like, and we're thinking about how we can get there actionably. So there's 2 phases, and I'm not gonna lie, like they're really fun. So you start with a critique or deconstruction phase, where you look at the problem, which in our case was lack of support for undergraduate women researchers. So we went in and critiqued what the issue was. And then we followed up with a utopian or reconstruction phase where we said, okay, these are all our critiques. This is where we want to be. How do we bridge that gap? And that's where that action happens. And I'm going to say beautiful again. That's what's beautiful about participatory methods is at the end, we create actionable items. So that's briefly Future Creating Workshop. And photo voice. I love photo voice. I've used photo voice as a learning tool in the classroom. I've used it to answer research questions. I've used it in a variety of ways. And essentially it's providing folks with cameras or relying on the camera that we all have. Thinking about, photo voice was originated in marginalized communities. So the traditional form of photo voice, you would provide cameras to those that don't have them. But when I did it with undergraduate students, they all had their phones. So they just use their phones. So providing people with cameras that can take photographs. And the goal is to instigate positive change in communities. So you work with your stakeholders to come up with a research problem or a question that you want to address. And as such, and after that, we come up with a prompt. So this prompt was, I think this one was as an undergraduate woman in STEM, I feel blank. And they would go and take a picture in response to that question. And so this picture it's at our university. And I don't even know if it looks like that anymore, Brittany, but it's at a space at our university where there's like a little window, it's on the ground. And this woman, she took the picture and she said that as a woman as an undergraduate woman in STEM, I feel curious. I want to explore the world. I always walk past this area on campus and I always want to know what's in there. How can I figure out what's in there? How can I do research to figure it out? So it really is that picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So how can we better understand a community or a group and their needs by using pictures to elicit those responses and then develop an action plan. So again, very brief on photo voice. And then I'll do a brief explanation of group level assessment. And then Brittany's going to really dig deep into how we did it.
And I'll just provide another quick example, Sheva, about photo voice. So we did photo voice project with a handful of women who had just come back from their co-op experience. And we were trying to understand, what is this experience like for you? And one of the most profound photos that we had was there was a mechanical engineer and she worked on a shop floor every day. So like a Dickies uniform with steel-toed boots. That's what she was wearing every day. And she took a photo of her steel-toed boots sitting next to her high heels in her closet. And the conversation that elicited from that after sharing her photo was this idea that her identity as a female and her identity as an engineer could not live simultaneously, that those were 2 identities that she had that had to live separate of each other, and how exhausting that was on co-op to try to mask and hide who she truly was in these spaces where she felt like she couldn't be both, right? So photo voice can really help dive deep into some heavy stuff very quickly by the photos that they bring back. And it's always interesting because they'll come back and they'll say, well, I just took this photo because it made sense to me. And then we start, digging into like, well, what does it mean to you? And as Sheva said, photo voice is one of the most beautiful methods that we've done. So.
And I'll also say, now that you mentioned that it's so much fun too, as like the researcher, to come in and see how people approach taking photos. Some folks, like engineers, for example, like are like, I know what I'm going to take a picture of and I'm going to go take a picture of it. And it might be kind of literal, but then other folks might like do something really metaphorical, and, you know, take a picture that represents something else. So, and we're going to have y'all do some photo voice later. So you'll see just how wonderful it is. But yeah, so that's just a little bit about photo voice. So group level assessment, or GLA, is one of our, if not our favorite participatory methods to use, not just because of the wonderful outcomes that come from it, but because you can get a lot of data in a short amount of time with a large group. It's inclusive. I like to call it like a more structured and engaged focus group, because people come to me and say, well, why don't you just use focus groups for this? Well, a focus group isn't going to capture what happens from this discussion or from this photo or whatever, why participatory methods are important. And it takes a shorter amount of time. So if you can't invest in a full like future creating workshop, that's a lot of time to do a multi-day thing. Like no, ain't nobody got time for that. Like we don't have time for it. So GLA makes it so you can do it in a span of 2 hours, the actual phases. And we found that actually doing it virtually, and we wrote a paper on this, that it's pretty much as engaging virtually as it is in person, which was awesome. But essentially the data is propelled by participants. It leads to creating action plans that work towards solving some sort of problem, developing a program, things like that. And it's inclusive of multiple individuals and experiences. So I don't want to steal any of Brittany's thunder, but I'll do real quick for why that is. Instead of a traditional focus group where everyone's talking around and someone may talk over somebody else, somebody may steal the show, somebody may not be the one that wants to talk. Group level assessment gives people a chance to reflect. And that's partially where that positionality comes in. So we're reflecting on who you are and what you bring to the space, as well as being able to, every single person gets to answer every single question. Whereas in a focus group, that's not always the case. So it allows for everybody to participate, whether you're a more reflective person or whether you more actively want to speak, it's able to do that for both. But I will let Brittany talk more about the details of GLA.
Sorry, I have too many screens. So then my mouse gets lost in between the screens. I know my people are here that like understand. Okay, so as Sheva has mentioned, we have done dozens of GLAs with different participants. We're going to share with you some data today about a GLA that we've done a few years ago. But as we go through this, please ask questions. And even at the end, if you have questions about really specific things about how to facilitate this, please let us know. You can use this in all different ways. So I know there were a few people that are faculty, that are educators. I've used this in my classes to try to understand, if I let students have a say in my syllabus, are they more engaged in that class overall? So understanding their needs, how they want to be evaluated, what makes them feel really successful and set up for success. And again, you can do this, you know, in a very abbreviated version in like one class session. So I've done it at the very beginning of the semester before and not finalized my syllabus until after. So you can use this for a lot of really cool ways. All right, so ours is very specific about women in engineering. And since most of you are our people in the room, these stats probably are not surprising to you, but let's just provide a baseline of what we know that the literature is telling us. Women are lagging in enrollment within engineering majors. This is historical knowledge. We have made little to no progress in most majors over decades of attempts. Women account for 12% of engineers within the US, and we know that after 10 years of being in the field, only about 10% of women who graduate from one of our programs will still be practicing as an engineer 10 years later. So they will graduate, they will go through our programs, and they will not practice long as engineers. And engineering is labeled as the last gender equitable and race equitable profession in the United States. So still a lot of work to be done in the engineering space. Shema and I go out on a limb here and say one of the reasons for this is because researchers are not using participatory methods to understand the problem. We're also not using feminist methods or feminist approaches to understand the problem. So again, one of the best things about using GLA is your participants analyze the data from their lens, right? Because in participatory methods, as Sheva mentioned, we know that we are biased. We come to the research space biased, and we cannot disconnect ourselves from that, no matter how hard we try. So having your co-researchers or your participants analyze that data with you, you know that the data is being analyzed from their perspective, not from ours. So another beautiful thing is that at the end, the action items, we'll share ours with you, but as administrators and faculty, the results or the action items or the interventions that we come up with typically cost a lot of money, right? And we're always like, well, we can't do that because we're going to need to apply for an NSF grant because we're going to need at least $1.5 million to like make this thing work. Where using something like GLA or a participatory method, the action items come from your participants and can oftentimes be done immediately. And we'll give you specific examples about that. But okay, so just to give you context, these were our questions. So what are the experiences of undergraduate women engineering students, specifically at our institution? How are women students defining and experiencing the culture of engineering? Because all of the literature highlights the masculine nature of the culture of engineering. So we were wondering, does that have something to do with what women are experiencing? Is it the culture within itself that is hindering women's success? What are the strategies that women engineering students use to be successful? So they're making it through our programs. And at our institution, their GPAs and their ACT scores and all of those things point that academically they do better than our male students. So why can we not keep them? And what resources or changes would be helpful in allowing women students to be more successful? So those were our questions. Okay, so here is the GLA process. So typically when we do this, we allot 3 hours. You can tweak this to get it less than 3 hours if you need it to be. So as I mentioned, I've done it 1 hour in a class. We've also done this virtually. And we're happy to share with you that paper that shows that this is the traditional in-person process that we've used, but we've modified this during COVID. Realistically, so that I could finish my dissertation. I didn't plan for COVID in my proposal. And then we had to figure out, how do I do this and tweak it? So we've kind of perfected a virtual process for GLA. So what does this look like in real life? So it starts with climate setting, right? This is doing introductions, setting the stage, letting folks know that this, is a safe space. We want everyone to be able to take up space here. So as Sheva mentioned, some of this, as the facilitator or the researcher, is really coming to that space kind of ready to do a facilitator dance. So making sure that folks are engaged, that no one is taking up too much space, and that everyone can engage. So step 2 is generating. So this is participants responding to prompts on large sheets of Post-it paper. So if you're wondering what this looks like, this is what it looks like in real life. So it's prompts or merely questions that are written on large Post-it notes that are posted around a room. Okay. So what participants will do is respond to those prompts. We like to have folks respond to them on Post-it notes. That makes it easier for them to manipulate and move things around later. But that's kind of your preference. So participants are responding. This takes about 45 minutes. You don't think that this will take that long, but this will take time. especially engineers, they want to be very thoughtful and very thorough in how they're responding. So, but the idea is that they respond with the first thing that comes to their mind. And let me show you what some prompts are. These are very specific prompts to our questions. So the culture of engineering is ... The preference is fill in the blanks, not yes or no questions, right? What I loved about my co-op experience was my peers in engineering are. So being very mindful about positive versus negative versus neutral leading prompts to try to get like a really holistic view. You will also see that you might read some of these and you're like, that is the same question to me. That is also intentional to understand, are our participants or our co-researchers reading these as the same? Because as the researcher, oftentimes I'm like, that's the same question, but students do not read them always as the same. So trying to get that clarity. The appreciating step is this is merely after students respond, they're just walking around and reading the other prompts to get a more holistic understanding of what is the data saying. And during this phase, we ask them to put a check mark or a star or a smiley face, whatever moves them on the responses that resonate with them, that they agree with. And then reflecting. So participants think through what stands out from their responses. So typically this is, they just sit by themselves after doing the climate setting, generating and appreciating, and take a few minutes to gather their thoughts, right? What's alive for you right now? What's resonating with you? Is there something that's standing out? Is there something that is like upsetting you or, you know, really speaking to you right now? So taking some moments to kind of do a pause and to reflect on that. And then the understanding phase. So again, this is another part of the process that will take a significant amount of time. So this is, you break the group into smaller groups and you ask them to physically remove the larger post-its from the wall and to analyze the data. So they're taking and they're trying to discover themes across questions. So what this might mean is the first 3 prompts here, that the students would have those 3 prompts and they would try to start looking for themes. What are you seeing across these? How are people responding? What is alive for folks? Again, the beauty of this is that they analyze the data, right? So this isn't Sheva and I going home and taking all these post-its and trying to make sense of this from our own perspective. Now, let me be very frank. Do Sheva and I do that? Yes, we do. But that is for an additional round of analysis of trying to understand themes, not coming up with action items. It's trying to understand, are there other things here from an administrator's perspective that we should be paying attention to that the women were not calling out, right? So these are things like, are women experiencing sexual harassment at higher rates? Are there things that we need to be talking to our employers about that is evidence from these things that they're experiencing? So that's a completely different topic, so we won't dive into that. So again, this is women getting into small groups. Again, this is what it looks like. This photo right here is specifically is them specifically doing the analyze portion. So they're getting together, they're looking for themes across those prompts. And then we do a report out as a larger group. So this is the most helpful if one person is writing notes as another person is facilitating the conversation. So we're capturing all of the themes together in order to come up with the larger group themes. And then as a group, we select what are the overall themes of this quote study, right? Of our discussion, what are the things that are really sticking out to you? And then the awesome part is moving into the action phase. So similar to that future creating workshop are, in order to create a better space, a utopia, what needs to happen, right? From these themes, what are the things that we need to be working on? So again, our prompts, this is what it looks like. But for this study specifically, these were our themes. So let's go over our themes and then we'll jump into action items. So our themes were, some of these are probably not surprising to any of us, but male dominated. So when asked questions, my peers in engineering are ... very heavily responded that their peers are mostly male, usually male, in white boys, right? So these are just a few examples of the comments that they made. Also recognize the competitive nature of engineering. So they mentioned that it was competitive, everyone was out for themselves, it was very serious, and that they felt like they had a lack of community with others because of this competitive nature. It wasn't, let's all do well on this test. It was, I'm going to do better than you. Tokenizing. So some women were flat out told that the only reason that they got their co-op experience by their male peers was because they were a woman, and that they were feeling a quota, which, as you can imagine, is super demoralizing. Stop pointing out that I am a female in engineering. So women were upset when there was attention drawn to the fact that they were a woman, or that the only reason that they were there or had space in engineering was because they were a woman, not because they were smart enough or capable enough. And again, which essentially is attributing their success to their gender rather than their abilities. And then we saw this really interesting internal motivation for women. So when trying to understand, like, why do you keep going? Like, what is propelling you and motivating you? A lot of women said that they wanted to be a role model. They recognize how difficult it is for them, and they want to make sure that no one has to experience it the way that they did. And this just sheer desire that they wanted to make the world a better place. So these were our themes. So from our themes, then we move participants into that last phase, which is the action items. So this is the good stuff. So it's really understanding from the participants' perspective. In our study, it was the women in engineering at UC. What do you need? Like, boots on the ground, what would make this better for you, starting, lofty to literally right now. So they wanted to build a community of women. So again, from those themes, they felt very isolated in their experiences. They felt very alone because depending on their major, I previously worked with computer engineering students, and there might be one female in a cohort, which means she is the only female in every one of her classes for an entire semester when she's on campus, right? Feeling very isolated. So one of the things that they recommended was, let's develop a group me. And I am 90 years old, and I was like, I don't know what a group me is. Can somebody explain this to me? So what they did is they passed around a piece of notebook paper, and somebody created a group me, which is a text group. Is that an appropriate way to describe it, Sheva? I don't know. I'm still 90. It's a group text that you can add folks to and delete folks from a text message on your phone. But what they were saying was, if we have an exam in calculus next week, I'd really like to study with somebody, right? And most of the majors were all taking calculus at the same time, right? But there's no females in my class, so how could I reach out? Or this idea of, I just want somebody to get dinner with. Sometimes I just don't want to eat lunch by myself, or somebody, to get coffee on the weekends or something. So they developed a group me right there in our session, and we checked in with women a few years later, and they were still using that group me. So the building a community of women was to help them feel less isolated, less alone in this space. They wanted to host special events at the start of each semester. Our understanding was that it was just for visibility. Like, there are other women here, right? Like, it's not just the three of us in chemical engineering, right? Like, there are more. Just as an opportunity to see other women and be around with other women and to create that community. And then encouraging women to join organizations like SWE or ACMW as an opportunity to engage more regularly with other women, in making sure that the freshmen that are coming in, or first year students, are aware that these opportunities exist. Building confidence within women. So again, we saw a lot of discouragement felt by our women because of this, right? The competitiveness and the tokenizing that they were experiencing. So building confidence with women. So they specifically requested that information about Title IX be shared in our Intro to Co-op class. More specifically, they wanted to know what is normal on co-op. Our program is very unique because we send all of our engineering students out the first or second semester of their sophomore year. So I'm sending them out as anticipating that they will behave like a professional when they are 19 or 20 years old. So women will come back and will say things like, my supervisor talked over me in meetings. Is that normal? Right? Or the social events for my division were golf outings. There was, and I don't golf. Is there another thing? So trying to help them understand what is normal on co-op, what is normal in a professional environment, but also knowing their resources and being knowledgeable about where to go to if they had issues or concerns that popped up on a co-op. I love this emotional intelligence training for faculty and staff. So they felt like they were not always approached in a nurturing way. So a very specific example is that one of the women got a C in calculus, and her academic advisor said, well, clearly you're not smart enough. Maybe you should just change your major. And the student felt very discouraged. And she was like, I am smart enough to be here. I have A's in all of my other classes. I just didn't do well on this calculus. So emotional intelligence training for faculty and staff, and being mindful of, examples given in class and holding space. And again, asking faculty and staff to address their own biases that they might be bringing to their work and working with students. This one was really interesting, but they wanted accurate course information in our database. So I'm sure we cannot be the only institution that struggles with technology issues. So our database is not always accurate when it comes to graduation requirements or what things students still need in order to graduate, or order of operations of things. And student says, that's really disempowering for me, that I don't know what I need, right? And then I'm relying on an academic advisor who might be telling me things like drop calculus or change your major because you're not smart enough, that I have to rely on that person now to give me the information that I need in order to be successful here. So again, this is why we have them analyze it, because I never would have thought in a million years that course information in our database being inaccurate was causing such turmoil for students and how they were experiencing our space. So build a support network for women. So host events for all students within the major, invite academic advisors and faculty and staff within the College of Engineering so that students can understand who are their advocates, who are their allies, who can they go to when they're having issues or concerns, and just helping them understand that there is a community of folks that are rallying around them and want them to be successful. Invite students who haven't committed to the University of Cincinnati to these events to set the tone that this institution cares for women in engineering. So again, this was such the beautiful thing of this internal motivation that they had, was that they wanted to constantly be reaching back and supporting the women that were going to come next after them. So yeah, so again, this is just an example. So if you look at this, there is nothing on here that requires us to get an NSF grant and $1 million to implement any of these things, which again is the beautiful thing of asking your co-researchers to come up with the action items. These are tangible. I will say the only thing that is really difficult is this emotional intelligence training for faculty and staff, right? Because I'm sure all of our institutions are the same. The faculty that need it are not the faculty that are showing up to the emotional intelligence training, and is really difficult to make faculty do anything that they don't want to do. So, and I say that as a faculty member. So, as Sheva mentioned, we do have some articles about the experiences of participating in a GLA. And what we have found is that the women that participate find it very empowering, right? Because they don't talk about these things often, even with their other female peers, right? Because they want to be perceived as doing well and having it together and being really knowledgeable and doing great. We have students that are even just outright told us, I don't tell my parents about what happens on co-op or in my classes, because I want them to think that it is sunshine and rainbows here. but that is not what I'm experiencing. So we know that they're masking some of these things. But in the GLA specifically, one of the participants mentioned seeing other people's perspective and experience made me think a little bit differently about my own. I left feeling more confident. And again, through our research, we know that the women felt less alone, right? This was really empowering that they know, oh, other women are also experiencing this. This isn't me on my own here. So let's just hold space for questions. Any questions that you have right now about our study, how it was framed, the prompts, the process, any of that?
So I don't want to take up too much room, but I do have some questions. So my first question is, when it comes to, like, you all use an affinity diagramming tool for your group level assessment, right? Are there any other tools that people can use for this method?
You want to take that one, Chip?
I'm struggling with how to answer. Can you repeat the first part of your question?
Yeah, so when you all are using the sticky notes and everything, from my understanding, that's called an affinity diagram.
Okay.
And so do you have any other tools that people can use outside of the affinity diagramming process?
Got it. I was not familiar with the term affinity diagram, so I think that's where I got lost. Okay, excellent question. And so I did post 3 of our articles in the chat, and one of them talks about doing it virtually. And I think that is one other technique that we have used, where we have had folks respond to the prompts ahead of time online via a survey. And then when we did it virtually, because virtually we can't, walk around a room or things like that, and it got really complicated. So we actually had people fill it out in more of a survey form. And then they shared out the prompts in the virtual one. And we actually take it in the first article I posted, we take it step by step for exactly how we did that.
Okay.
I'll also say, so when I've tried to have the in-person portion of it just be an hour, so like the analyzing and the getting the action items, which an hour is very rushed, I will say that. But if you're trying to get it done in a class time, you only have so many minutes. I've done the generating portion as a survey, so they respond that way. And then all of that data creating portion already exists for us to work with when we're in the in-person session as well. So did that answer the question, Bree?
Yes. And then we have another question in the chat from Sarah. She said, how did you get the students together for the activity to start? Was it a SWE event or something else? Tips on getting a group together for these activities.
So but we also have just asked, like, one of our data people, can you give me a list of all of the women in the College of Engineering? And we've sent out an email. And I guess we should also specify like sample size of like how many women you want to actually be at a GLA. I would say 15 to 30, any more than 30. And it is just really difficult to kind of manipulate's not the correct word, but like navigate that large of a group while allowing folks to authentically take up space, if that makes sense. And I've done them with as little, Sheva, the one that we did with seniors, there was only 7 there. And that was still a very meaningful, powerful conversation that we had. So typically if we had 60 sign up to participate, we would cut the group in half and we would do it in 2 different spaces. But we were surprised by how many women wanted to participate, and all we did was provided food. We had pizza, and I think we gave out $5 Starbucks gift cards for 3 hours in one, like a Monday evening. So
I see a question or a comment about mural. So we actually did try mural like pre-pandemic before, didn't we, Brittany, before we were like super like invested in doing things virtually. So I think that is something that we could reconsider. But we have not used it since, I don't believe.
Yeah, I think one of the things that discouraged us from using Mural was because not everyone is familiar with it, and we didn't want that to become a barrier, that like some people were really good at using it so that their voices kind of overshadowed. So we literally used Qualtrics, a survey, and then I dumped all of the data from the Qualtrics into a Google Doc. And the Google Doc is what they used to do the appreciating step. Let me go back. This may be helpful to look at it. So the difference was that when we did it virtual, the generating step was first. So we did that virtually. They responded to Qualtrics. I dumped it into a Google Doc, all of the information, and then they did the appreciating phase in a Google Doc. And then when we got together, we started with climate setting and then jumped right to understanding.
And last one, I guess, I'm a bit curious about like where intersectionality fits into all of this. So were there any particularly unique actions that your Black or Latina women may have wanted?
So we'll be very transparent. The University of Cincinnati has lower than average diversity numbers. So most of the women that participated in our study were white women. So that's something that Sheva and I have talked about, going to other institutions and replicating what we did here to try to understand that portion better, because that is just a disadvantage of using only our population on our campus.
Okay.
Do you have other thoughts, Sheva?
Yeah, I would say so twofold. So one, we have explored that through more traditional qualitative methods. So we have done interviews with Black women engineering students, and I believe that they're in the pipeline at some point. One of our collaborators is also going to look at Latina engineering students in particular. But one thing that comes up is, as Brittany mentioned, it's pretty abysmal, our numbers, and it also raises a concern of anonymity, because if there's only a handful of women of color that are in engineering, you could pinpoint who it is. And we ran into those issues actually during some of our interviews. When we were coding, it was very obvious who it was because there's only a few. So those are some things that have come up. So yeah, we've talked about bringing participatory methods into other institutions so we can get a larger sample size. And we have a few papers in the works and a few research projects in the works using an intersectional lens to look at women of color in engineering, but using more traditional qualitative methods.
All right. Thank you.
All right, so we've got an activity. Brittany, I think I'm going to do 5 minutes and then 10 minutes just because we're almost at the hour mark. Okay, perfect. So if you're not, like, I'm just going to say, just based on some of the awesome things that Brittany was sharing, if you're not sold on this yet, you can procrastinate writing your syllabus for even longer if you do it in class on the first day. So love that. And you get your data half analyzed for you. So win-win, right? Okay, so we are going to do a participatory activity. We're going to start with a reflection on your own, answering some prompts for a few minutes. And then we'll get you into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And we really encourage you to turn on your cameras when you're in your breakout rooms. And we understand that not everyone is able to do that or is comfortable with that. And that's fine. But just, we would encourage you to do that if you are able. So we want you to start planning your own GLA. So we would like you to take the next 5 minutes to think of a problem or issue in your organization or your community that you'd like input on. Think about what your research questions might be or what you're hoping to discover or understand better. And then if you have the time, write 5 prompts that address your questions that you could ask stakeholders. And then you will discuss in groups of 3 what you came up with and kind of workshop those together and provide feedback. So we'll leave this slide up. Take a few minutes to do that. If you don't finish in the next 5 minutes, that's fine, because you're going to get feedback and chat in your groups about it as well. Okay. And let me know if you have any questions. Well, welcome back, everyone. We were all just Brittany and I were all just chatting a bit, and another technique came up as we were chatting that I'll briefly share before we open it up to a Q&A pre our last activity. But one technique that I've used before as well is the fishbone diagram, and I've seen it used like for a variety of different things, but this specifically is a fishbone diagram as a participatory method. And it's the concept of, you can't tackle the whole fish, like the lack of women and women of color and people of color in engineering is a wicked problem, right? And there's so many different factors that are impacting that. So we kind of have to pick a bone and decide like, how are we going to tackle it? So that's one way to, kind of help you formulate those research questions with your stakeholders, knowing that there's so many different aspects. And that goes along too with a future creating workshop, because when you're picking apart a problem, you're able to and you're deconstructing a problem, you're able to see so many different ways that we can reach that utopia, right? But we got to pick one, and hopefully others will pick another one, and then we'll meet in the middle. But yes, that's just another brief kind of quick technique that you can use. Awesome. So hopefully that went well. We're going to open it up to questions here. And then I think we'll do like 5 minutes of questions, and then we'll do our final activity. Does that sound good to everyone? To Brittany? Good. Okay, cool. So we'll just open the floor.
Questions, comments, concerns?
So I'll speak up if I can. We had a very good discussion with different examples, and one of the things I proposed was finding out more about inaccessibility for people with mobility issues on my campus. And so the key questions that I would be interested in exploring is, how many people are affected by this? Who is, how are our whatever constituent group is affected by this? And secondarily, how much awareness is there around this issue? Because I suspect for those of us who don't have mobility issues, it's not something that comes to mind. So two possible prompts would be, when I traverse campus, and then have people spontaneously respond to what they're doing. And another one might be the amount of time I take to get to class or to another part of campus and then leave it blank, because some people might say is fine, is too short, is too much, whatever. But also just a general question. I think about disability and leave it blank. So a lot, never, it's not something that I hope to have. So those are the types of things that came to mind, but it was a short period. I'm sure we could be a bit more creative than that, or I could be a bit more creative than that, given more time.
No, I love it. I think those are really great prompts. And I think that you could, like, when we're talking about, like the positive and the negative prompts and mixing in the neutral, it sounds like you've got some like good neutral ones going, and then perhaps like bringing in some others. And that I love that was the topic you chose. It reminds me of when I was working in the Inclusive Excellence Office in engineering. We were the Inclusive Excellence Office, and we were on the second floor, and the elevator didn't work, and they wouldn't fix the elevator because they were going to demolish the building. So like, sorry, can't do anything. I'm like, how are we supposed to, like, we're the Inclusive Excellence Office. Like, we need to be thinking about these things, right? Anyway, yes, that was my digression, but I love that. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
I'll jump in because it's related. She was in my group and it's related to that. So we were talking about how we have this return to the office policy, and some people are raising concerns that it's not inclusive because of people, different diverse groups having certain issues with returning to the work full-time, to the office full-time. And so one of the comments was about people being able to come together in meetings, and that bringing on anxiety. And so one of the questions could be, what are some ways that we could, wait a minute, let me get it right. Some of the benefits of virtual events are ... Disadvantages of virtual events are, or if I could change one thing about our meeting format, it would be, and that to me, the last one was very open-ended to get people to say, different ways that they could meet and have us explore over.
I love that. And I love your prompts and how open-ended. And I think, Tracy, this is something at our institution, the policy that they instituted, people left. We had a lot of faculty and staff who left our institution based off of how the institution handled the return back to work because it wasn't inclusive. So I love that you're thinking about that and holding space to have that conversation. So I love it.
Yeah, as I was listening to Tracy, I was like, yes, all of this, because 100%, that's one of the main reasons why I left. So yeah, I think we can take one more question and then move on to the photo bus activity. Or we can just move on to the photo bus activity if we want to. That works too. It'll give us some
Whenever
extra.
this happens, because we have to do, does everyone do Robert rules at faculty meetings, or maybe it's just us, that I'm always like, oh, seeing that there is none. Okay, let's move on. So that's the key phrase.
Well,
Seeing that there are no questions.
I do have a question if I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
Of course.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about ways of doing these similar ideas, but online, because I'm thinking about women engineering in Colombia. So I don't know if you have any advice for doing this.
So yes, so I can repost it again. So there's an article in the chat that I posted that literally will tell you step by step how to do it and exactly how we did it in comparison to the traditional one. So I would for sure start there and I'll share it again. So it's at the bottom of the chat.
And if you want to also reach out, I don't know if it was in one of the articles. Chev and I specifically wrote about like tips and tricks for doing this virtually. So like things to keep in mind as a facilitator, as a practitioner, and we would be more than happy to share that with you directly if that's not in that actual paper.
Yeah, for sure. Good point, Brittany. Cool.
Thank you.
Of course. All right.
Okay, so now we're going to transition to the last activity because we didn't want to end with Q&A. So we're going to ask that you do a very tiny little photo voice. So if you will take your phone or some way to take a photo, we want you to respond to the prompt, what's alive for you as we end this workshop, right? So how are you feeling? What is the next step for you? So you can turn your camera off. If you want to get up, we'll give you 4 minutes. I can't give you 4 minutes. I'll give you 3 minutes. We'll give you 3 minutes if you want to get up. If you want to go grab an item too, if you prefer to do it that way, if taking a photo is too difficult. But just try and get an understanding what's alive for you as we end this workshop. So we'll give you until 25 after. All right. Does anyone, can we have a few people that share? And feel free to, if you just want to post your photo in the chat, we would love to see what your photos are. But anybody want to just do a share out or a report out and help us understand what's alive for you and what next steps might look like?
I don't think sharing is open or permission.
I can change that. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Can you see anything? I can't figure.
No, actually, I wonder if you're gonna have to take off your slides, Brittany.
Oh, okay.
Okay, can you see that now?
Yes.
So this is a painting that I picked up in the Bay Area a few years ago, and it shows people who care about diversity and people from diverse backgrounds, and it's our community here in the US, but I would expand it globally. And so that's what's coming to mind right now. As I walked around my room, I thought, these are the principles that we love, and this is what the session has been all about.
I love that. Thank you so much. What are next steps? What does that look like for you?
Well, the next steps would for me to really dive deeply into the GLA process at least, and then figure out opportunities that are upcoming in the next month or two where I can begin to use it, starting probably with a smaller group, but then expanding it, and maybe beyond that, training people how to use it so they can do it internally with their units.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course, and I'll stop sharing now, I think. There we go.
I think we have time for one or two more people. Anybody else want to share?
I was having trouble getting my picture to go from my phone to the computer, but I'll share what I took a picture of. I'm actually visiting with family right now, and they were redoing their basement, and all the photo albums are all now piled in what is the guest room / my room right now, and made me think about how grateful I am to my family for supporting me as a female engineer. And I came from a family of engineers, and so I had that resilience, to go through and not be burdened by feeling out like an outcast or things like that in my education. And so what my takeaway from that is, how can I pay that forward?
I love that. Thanks, Sarah.
I see there's a photo from Mary in the chat. Let's see.
Is it showing?
I've got it. So I've got some there. Let me
Oh yeah, Post-it notes.
Yeah,
post-it notes. Yeah. So you want to share what your thought behind that was?
sure. I'm a big fan of anyone who knows me knows I use Post-it notes excessively and obsessively, and I just find that they bring ideas to life. And so I think it's a really powerful tool to get people sharing and collaborating.
That's the first step to becoming an action researcher, is having Post-its everywhere.
I've been doing that for a long time, so
Love it.
This is your method, Mary. It's all about, we actually, in our articles, we couldn't call them Post-it notes because that is the actual trademark name. So we had to call them sticky notes.
Yes.
yeah. So
In all of our articles.
we get a big donation from 3M every year, so I've had to train myself to call them Post-it notes and not sticky notes.
Yes. Love it. I think that's like the one thing I miss out working in an office, is like just taking a bunch of Post-it notes and bringing them home, because I'm that person. It's bad. I love Post-it notes. So we are 1 minute till the half-hour mark. I know I can stick around for a bit. Brittany I don't know if Brittany, if you could stick around. Yeah. So we'll stick around, but we'll let y'all go because I know that we're at time. But thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Bree.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for coming. We hope that you can use some tips and tricks from this to listen more vividly to the voices of your women students or your minority students on your campus or in the work that you do. So